You're stripped bare, your body smeared with filth. You're crawling through the dust of the street while your neighbors, your friends, your family, all watch and laugh. In ancient Egypt, death was often considered too merciful for certain crimes. They believed true punishment wasn't about pain, it was about shame. The Egyptians mastered psychological destruction. They didn't need whips or swords. They could destroy you without shedding a single drop of blood. They attacked what truly mattered in their culture: your name, your honor, your legacy even your afterlife. And once your reputation was gone, it was as if you never existed. Today, we pull back the veil on how the ancient Egyptians turned humiliation into one of their deadliest weapons. These punishments were crafted, not just to make you suffer, but to ensure that everyone remembered what you did and what it cost you. But how exactly did this system of social destruction work? In ancient Egypt, justice wasn't just about laws or rulers. It was a ritual, a performance, and a warning. To others, let's explore how they made shame eternal. It was public theater, and shame was the star of the show. Forget what you've heard about divine justice or balanced scales. Yes, the Egyptians had judges, scribes, and legal codes. But real control, that came from punishments you'd never forgotten. Neither would your neighbors. The justice system wasn't just about righting wrongs. It was about sending a message loud, public, and unforgettable. The goal wasn't just to punish the guilty. It was to etch fear into the hearts of the living. Some crimes didn't lead to execution. In fact, that would have been too easy. Caught stealing, caught cheating in business, or worse, insulting the gods. You might survive the trial, but you'd face something far worse than death, a living punishment, one that stuck to your name like tar, followed you through the streets, and turned you into a walking warning. Ancient carvings on temple walls reveal it all. Offenders stripped, shackled, and paraded like animals, mocked, spat on, dragged through the very town they once belonged to. These weren't random acts of cruelty. They were rituals, deliberate, calculated, and meant to be remembered. Take adultery, for instance. If a married woman was caught with another man, the goal wasn't just punishment, it was public disgrace. She could be shaved bald, her clothes torn, forced to confess her crime in front of a jeering crowd, her shame laid bare for all to witness. Because in ancient Egypt, justice didn't end with guilt. It began with humiliation. She would be stripped bare, her head shaved to the scalp, and then paraded through the streets like a living symbol of disgrace. Crowds gathered, garbage flew, insults pierced the air like arrows. And if that wasn't enough, they'd sometimes brand her skin or tattoo her shame right onto her body, a permanent reminder of what she'd done. No hiding, no second chances. In ancient Egypt, your punishment didn't end with pain. It was designed to follow you everywhere. Because, in this world, your body became the sentence. You wore your crime like a scarlet mark. Not just in flesh, but in memory, in whispers, in the way people looked away when you walked past. Blasphemy, a crime against the gods. That was just as bad, sometimes worse. Speak ill of Amun-Ra, or defy the sacred order, and you'd be dragged into a temple courtyard, forced to kneel, while robed priests stood above you, reading your offense like a public curse. Then came the lash. 1, 2. Over and over while the crowd watched. People would point, children would remember, stories would be told for generations. That's the one who insulted the gods. The bruises would fade. But the shame, that stayed. Thieves didn't fare much better. Steal from a temple, not just a crime, but a spiritual betrayal, and you might keep your hand, but lose your dignity. They'd smear you in dung, tie you to a post in the center of the market, where the flies swarmed, the sun burned, and the people avoided you like a curse. You became a warning in human form. An example, even after you were released, the smell, the memory, the stain on your identity stayed. It was like walking around with a sign on your chest that read, "I broke the rules." And in Egypt, there was no way to wash that off. None of this was random. Every detail was calculated. Egyptian officials understood something chilling. The fear of public shame was stronger than any sword. If you believed your entire village might watch you crawl through the dirt, naked, filthy, and branded, you'd think twice before breaking the law. And if you did make a mistake, your punishment wasn't just for you, it was a lesson for everyone else. The evidence is carved in stone. Ancient temple walls show prisoners on their knees, begging for mercy, while cold crowds looked on without pity. Some depictions go even further. Offenders forced to wear animal masks, a cruel transformation meant to strip away their humanity. You weren't just punished, you were degraded, deformed, dehumanized. Because this wasn't just about pain, it was about control. A psychological ritual designed to crush the spirit, and in doing so, keep the rest of society perfectly in line. And perhaps the worst part, the punishment didn't end when the crowd dispersed. A branded face, a shaved head, a permanent mark of disgrace. These weren't wounds, they were identities. You carried your shame like a shadow. Your neighbors stared. Your family might disown you, and no matter how much time passed, you were never the same again. In a society obsessed with honor, legacy, and how others remembered you, losing your reputation was like losing your soul. After a public punishment, you didn't just carry scars, you carried a social death sentence. Finding work, nearly impossible. Restoring your name, forget it. This was a lifetime punishment and it didn't fade with time, and if you think that sounds harsh, just wait until the Egyptians wanted to make an example out of someone. Let's talk about a punishment that left nothing to the imagination, literally. Picture this. You're dragged into the center of town. Your clothes are ripped away. Your head is shaved bare. The sun beats down as the crowd gathers not to help, but to watch, to laugh, to mock, to stare. Because in ancient Egypt, being stripped naked wasn't just a punishment, it was a public ritual of erasure. Nudity wasn't just embarrassing, it was shame incarnate. Egyptians took modesty seriously. People kept their bodies covered, their dignity intact. To be seen naked in public meant you had fallen so far, you were no longer worthy of respect. You were no longer truly human, forced to walk the streets without clothes. You weren't just being punished, you were being erased from respectable society. And the filth, that was intentional. Dung smeared on your face wasn't just to disgust you. In ancient Egyptian belief, dirt and excrement symbolized impurity. To be covered in it was to become ritually unclean, spiritually polluted, unfit for the afterlife. This wasn't about making you suffer for a day. This was about branding your soul. Covering someone in filth wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration. This person is unclean. Sometimes ashes were mixed into the dung, creating a sticky, foul paste that clung to the skin. It didn't wash off easily. The stench lingered for days. A walking punishment, visible, unforgettable. You didn't need to ask what someone had done. You could smell their shame. Ancient temple reliefs even show these scenes: thieves paraded, smeared, disgraced. They weren't just depictions. They were public warnings carved in stone. This is what happens to thieves. No one could pretend they didn't know the consequences. And then came the final blow. Branding, tattooed, burned, marked in the face, right where no one could miss it. The symbols weren't random. A pig meant you were dirty. A donkey meant you were a fool. These weren't punishments you could serve and forget. They were lifelong labels, stamped on your body like a curse. You couldn't hide, you couldn't start over. Every time you entered a room, your crime entered first. And in a culture where your name, your honor, and your afterlife depended on reputation, that was worse than prison. It was a spiritual life sentence. Because the damage didn't stop in this world. The Egyptians believed the soul had to be pure to enter the afterlife. Your body was your vessel, and if it was shaved, marked, or defiled, the gods might reject. A pig tattoo wasn't just a social mark. It could be your ticket denied to eternity. Archaeologists have found the evidence: mummies with animal tattoos, shaved scalps, marks of humiliation preserved for thousands of years. One bore a pig inked into his arm, likely branded in disgrace. Another had signs of head shaving just before burial. These weren't mistakes. They were deliberate acts of posthumous punishment. Even in death, the shame endured. These punishments were meant to last, etched into memory, branded on flesh, and whispered about long after the bruises had healed. If you survived, you lived under a new identity. The shame. Everywhere you went, there were stares, whispers, avoidance. No one wanted to hire you. No one wanted to marry you. You became a walking cautionary tale, living proof that breaking the rules came with a price you could never repay. But public humiliation didn't always end with being watched. Sometimes, the punishment was in the movement itself. Because in ancient Egypt, the most devastating punishments weren't always violent. They were degrading. And nothing stripped a person of dignity more than being forced to crawl on hands and knees, through dirt, through dust, through the eyes of everyone you once stood beside. This wasn't just about physical discomfort. This was a ritual meant to erase your pride, your confidence, your humanity. Forget whips and chains. Crawling was slow, visible, humiliating. And the worst part, everyone watched. Temple courtyards, sacred spaces built for prayer, became theaters of shame. After being marched through the streets, you would be dragged to one of these holy grounds. And there, before gods and neighbors alike, you'd be ordered to drop the stone beneath you. Hot, jagged, unforgiving. Your knees scraped, your palms bled. Your breath came in dust and heat, and all around you stood the priests, the elders, the community, not to help, but to witness. The temple, a place meant for worship, became a stage. And you were the performance. Even when the crawling stopped, the punishment continued. Because once your dignity was taken, your place in society vanished too. Your family shared the shame. They might lose jobs, status, friends. You were barred from rituals, pushed to the margins. In a tightly knit society where everyone knew everyone, a punishment like that didn't fade. It followed you like a shadow into your home, your future, even your tomb. And yet for some, this was still better than execution. You lived. But what kind of life was it? A life stripped of honor, burdened by whispers, and marked by a punishment that never truly ended. The ancient Egyptians didn't just invent ways to punish. They mastered how to make the punishment stick deep into your name, your soul, your afterlife. And if you thought crawling through temple courtyards was the lowest point, Think again, because some punishments took humiliation to terrifying new heights, combining pain with spectacle in ways that still make us shudder today. Not every sentence relied on brute force. Sometimes the most effective shame came from something as simple and as sinister as nature itself. Take the honey trap. This punishment was specifically reserved for women, particularly those accused of the ultimate scandal, seducing a priest to the temple elite. This wasn't just immoral, it was a spiritual contamination, a threat to the sacred order, and the response, cruel, public, symbolic. The woman would be tied upright to a wooden pole, placed in a high-traffic area, a temple gate, a bustling marketplace, anywhere everyone could see. Then came the honey, poured slowly, deliberately, over her head, her shoulders, her body, until she was glazed in sweetness, a living statue of sticky shame. Under the searing Egyptian sun, the honey would melt, seeping into every fold of skin, every strand of hair, soaking her in a slow, sickening ritual of humiliation. But the worst was still to come. The honey wasn't just for the crowd. It was an invitation to nature's most relentless tormentors. Because the honey wasn't just a symbol of shame, it was bait. Under the blistering sun, the sweet scent spread like wildfire. And soon, the insects came. Flies, ants, wasps, bees, drawn by the sugar, swarming, crawling, biting, budding, biting. What began as humiliation soon turned into agony. The accused woman couldn't move. Tied, exposed, defenseless bugs invaded her eyes, her mouth, her skin. Every sting, every bite, every crawling touch became part of the punishment. The pain was one thing, the fear, another. But worst of all was the slow, public breakdown of dignity. As she stood there, a spectacle of suffering, the crowd watched. Not in silence, but with whispers, with laughter, with judgment. To the Egyptians, this wasn't just punishment. It was purification through suffering, a way to purge the spiritual infection, to make sure no one ever dared to defile the sacred again. And when it was over, if she survived, she wasn't freed. She was forever marked. Her reputation ruined, her body scarred, her place in society erased. Because in ancient Egypt, shame didn't end when the crowd walked away. It lived in your skin, your name, your soul. It didn't take long. The insects came fast. Flies, beetles, wasps drawn by the thick, shimmering coat of honey now melting into her skin. Some accounts even suggest that priests themselves released bees to speed up the torment, as if the sun and shame weren't enough. Honey might sound harmless. It isn't a weapon. It doesn't slice, burn, or poison. But left on bare flesh for hours, under the relentless Egyptian heat, it becomes a nightmare. The insects didn't just crawl, they bit, they stung. They left welts, raised and red, across every inch of her body. Eyes, mouth, legs, breasts. Nowhere was safe. She couldn't move. She couldn't wipe them away. She stood there exposed, sticky, helpless, a living statue of suffering. And the worst part, it wasn't just the pain, it was the dehumanization. The complete collapse of dignity. She was covered in honey, covered in dirt, covered in shame, a spectacle, a warning, a curse. Crowds gathered not to stop it, not to help, but to watch, because this wasn't just a punishment. It was a spectacle, a public ritual designed to send a clear, terrifying message. Break the temple's rules, and you'll become a living display of shame. But why target women? In ancient Egypt, priests were expected to remain pure, untouched by temptation or sign. And if a priest was accused of breaking that sacred vow, the blame fell squarely on the woman. She was seen not as a victim, but as the threat, the one who lured purity into corruption. The man might face quiet discipline behind temple walls, but the woman, she paid in blood, in honey, in humiliation. Her suffering was made painfully public, so that others would fear to follow. Temple officials weren't just punishing her. They were protecting their own image and making sure no one ever dared to cross that line again. And yes, some women survived. Ancient records describe victims being cut down after a day or more, alive, but barely. Their bodies covered in welts, insect bites, and scars. But survival wasn't salvation. The honey washed off. The shame didn't. These women returned to society with bodies marked and reputations ruined. No one wanted to marry them. Few would hire them. Even their own families might turn them away. They became ghosts in their own lives, living reminders of what happened when you broke sacred rules. But public humiliation wasn't just reserved for commoners or disgraced temple women. Even pharaohs understood the devastating power of shame, not as punishment, but as political strategy. In ancient Egypt, public disgrace was a weapon, a tool as sharp as any blade, but far more lasting. High-ranking officials who fell from the pharaoh's favor weren't quietly dismissed. They were stripped of everything they once represented, their titles, their dignity, their legacy, and it wasn't done in private. It was staged for maximum impact. The goal was simple: destroy their reputation so completely that no one, not even their friends, would dare to stand beside them. Take Panob, the foreman of Deir el-Medina during the reign of Ramesses III. He wasn't just accused of corruption, he was made into an example. Rather than a quiet trial or exile, he was dragged in front of his own crew, the very workers he once commanded. There he was stripped of his fine linen robes, the fabric of status, ripped away like his power. Then came the final act. He was forced to press his hands into hot wax, a symbolic confession burning guilt into his flesh for all to witness. It wasn't about justice. It was about shattering the man, crushing his legacy, and etching his downfall into memory. Because in Egypt, blood wasn't always needed. Shame could do the job just as well, sometimes even better. Those blackened handprints weren't just punishment, they were a warning. Placed on public display at the very site of the offense, they served as a daily reminder of one man's fall from grace. Workers, citizens, even passing children, all saw exactly what happens when someone crosses the line. But why such elaborate shame? Because a dead rival might be remembered as a martyr, a humiliated one. He becomes a lesson, a deterrent, a symbol of fear. Ancient Egyptians understood this power well. Tomb paintings and temple inscriptions didn't hide it, they flaunted it. One vizier's tomb even shows his disgraced predecessor crouched like an animal, being force-fed rotting fruit. The message couldn't be clearer. Disobedience doesn't just destroy your career, it strips you of your humanity. And it wasn't just for nobles. Professional humiliation reached all ranks. Architects who failed in their duties weren't exiled or executed right away. No, they were sometimes forced to live in the very ruins they built, a daily confrontation with their own incompetence. In ancient Egypt, shame was more than a consequence, it was a weapon, sharper than a blade, more lasting than death. Failure in ancient Egypt didn't just cost you your position, it cost you your dignity. Viziers who failed in their duties weren't executed in silence. No, they were forced to attend official ceremonies dressed in children's clothes, their adult status stripped away, their shame displayed like a banner. It was a public spectacle of regression, of power lost, and it got worse. The Turin judicial papyrus describes a general, once decorated, now disgraced, paraded through the barracks with donkey dung smeared on his ceremonial uniform. Every soldier watched, every rank understood. Authority could vanish in an instant. Priests, supposedly sacred, were not spared either. When a temple accountant was caught stealing holy offerings, his punishment was poetic and brutal. He was made to wear a necklace of moldy bread, the very item he had stolen. Then, day after day, he stood at the temple gates, on display like a cursed idol. Worshippers didn't just pass him, they remembered him. He became part of the temple's daily rhythm, a living reminder of divine betrayal. And for those who dared to challenge the pharaohs themselves, the punishment could reach beyond death. Take Queen Hatshepsut, a powerful ruler, erased not with blades, but with chisels. Her successors didn't simply destroy her legacy. They edited it, carving out her name and image from monuments. Leaving behind conspicuous blanks, the silence spoke louder than words. In ancient Egypt, humiliation wasn't accidental. It was designed, deliberate, psychological, and eternal. Even in stone, erasure left its mark. The rough, gouged patches where Hatshepsut's cartouches once stood didn't just remove her name, they highlighted her absence. A void carved with intent. Today, archaeologists still uncover these scars, evidence that in ancient Egypt, the erasing memory was as much performance as it was punishment, and the Egyptians didn't reserve humiliation only for their own. Foreign enemies were given theatrical disgrace. Captured generals were marched through the streets of Memphis, not in chains but in absurd costumes. Nubian leaders in oversized wigs, Syrian commanders made to dance in temple skirts. These weren't just jokes, they were sanctioned humiliations meant to rewrite power. The bent Stele even recounts one of the most brutal examples. A Libyan prince, once proud, was forced to lie beneath the feet of Egyptian nobles during a grand celebration. He became a living footstool, a symbol of total subjugation, and the scribes made sure it was written down, preserved for eternity. These weren't random acts. They followed strict ritual codes. Stripping someone of their clothing meant stripping them of social identity, making them crawl, wear animal masks, or behave like beasts. That was a calculated assault on their humanity. In ancient Egypt, shame wasn't just punishment, it was art, a ritual, a message carved into history. Public disgrace in ancient Egypt wasn't just for spectacle, it was for memory. A dead official might fade from thought, but the one forced to sweep temple streets, in his underwear, he lived on not in honor, but in whispered stories and sharp stares. His shame echoed longer than his career ever did. And for the worst offenders, it didn't end there. Some were denied a proper burial, their names scratched off family tombs, their bodies cast outside sacred grounds, their memory wiped clean. In a culture where to be remembered was to exist, this was the final execution, a punishment beyond death. Because in ancient Egypt, your name was everything. It wasn't just a label, it was your passport to eternity. A name spoken was a soul sustained. A name forgotten was a soul lost. This obsession with legacy turned erasure into the harshest sentence of all. Not torture, not death, oblivion. When the state decided to erase you, they didn't simply cross you off a list. They unmade you. They didn't just punish you. They hunted your memory. If you crossed the sacred lines, committed treason, stole from the temple, blasphemed against the gods, the punishment wasn't left to time. It was immediate. Systematic. Scribes and workers were dispatched like executioners. With chisels, they carved your name off tomb walls, scraped it from sacred scrolls, and erased you from your own family tree. Even statues, solid stone, meant to last for eternity, were not spared. Sometimes they hacked so furiously at your inscriptions, they cracked the very rock that bore your likeness. This wasn't just about silencing you. It was about rewriting reality, making it seem as though you had never even existed. But why go to such brutal, obsessive lengths? Because in ancient Egyptian belief, your name was your soul's anchor. Without it, your spirit had no destination. No one could pray for you. No offerings would reach your tomb. The gods would not recognize your existence. You would wander, alone, for eternity, not dead, but utterly lost. Temple texts don't soften the blow. They describe this fate as worse than 1,000 deaths. And that wasn't metaphor. People feared this obliteration more than execution. Just look at the story of Akhenaten, the so-called heretic pharaoh. After Akhenaten's death, his enemies didn't just bury him, they buried his memory. For years, chisel by chisel, they carved his name out of every monument in Amarna, his capital city. They scoured walls, shattered statues, and rewrote inscriptions. A few fragments survived, tucked into doorframes, forgotten niches, but to most Egyptians, it was as if he had never ruled at all. For centuries, Akhenaten vanished. His memory only resurfaced when archaeologists stumbled upon those hidden cartouches, centuries too late for the man who once dared to defy tradition. But this wasn't a punishment reserved for kings, viziers, priests. Even ordinary workers could face the same erasure. In the tomb of the official mess, his brother's name has been carefully scratched out from every wall, except for one faint corner, barely visible in the dark. A last whisper of a life erased. Getting your name back. Nearly impossible. Once the priests completed their work, there was no appeal, no forgiveness. Only in rare moments when a future ruler saw political value in restoring a name, did the dead return to the record. Take Hatshepsut. Her name, too, was chiseled into silence after her reign. But generations later, fragments were restored, not out of mercy, but strategy. A forgotten queen, partially remembered, only because it served someone else's power. For the rest, once gone, you stayed gone. And that threat, the fear of being erased, was stronger than chains or swords. Every blank space on a tomb wall, every missing name in a scroll, was a silent warning. Step out of line, and you'll vanish without a trace. But for many, the punishment didn't stop there. In ancient Egypt, shame didn't end when the crowd went home. It lingered. It clung, not just to the body, but to the soul. Punishment wasn't meant to be a moment, it was a lifetime sentence. If you were shaved, beaten, or forced into a public ritual, you weren't just disgraced, you were branded. That mark seeped into every corner of your life. The scars faded. The whispers never did. Take Kenna, a workman from Deir el-Medina, caught stealing tools. He was flogged and had his head shaved, a common penalty. But what followed? That was the real punishment. No one sat with him at meals. His daughters were shunned, unable to marry. His name that showed up last on village ration lists, even below teenage apprentices. One mistake, and Kenna spent decades on the edge of society, invisible, yet always on display. And death didn't offer peace. For most Egyptians, the afterlife was sacred. Burials were acts of devotion, carefully planned for eternity. But for the disgraced, their final resting places tell a darker story. Archaeologists call them grudge burials. Bodies crammed sideways into tombs, ceramic jars deliberately shattered around them. Some mummies turned to face the wall, a silent, eternal exile. Even in death, they were denied dignity. Shame, in Egypt, wasn't just felt. It was engineered to last forever. Even in death, disgrace followed you. Every detail of a burial could whisper rejection, and sometimes, it screamed. In one tomb, a man's body was wedged in so awkwardly, it looked as though his family couldn't even bring themselves to face him. They wanted nothing to do with him, not in life, and certainly not in the afterlife. And the shame didn't just affect the condemned. It bled into the bloodline. Marriage contracts from Memphis reveal the deep societal scars. Some explicitly forbade marriage to anyone bearing the mark of Thoth, a polite way of saying someone with a criminal tattoo. Others required brides to prove they had never undergone public punishment, as if shame was a disease that could be passed on. Because in Egypt, family reputation was everything. One public correction, and not just your life, but the lives of your children and grandchildren were branded. The guilt became generational. Work records from Thebes show how that legacy lingered. At a local bakery, one man appeared on the payroll, but only received half rations. The scribe made a quiet note beside his name, by order of the overseer. No trial, no debate, just a punishment that lived on, 20 years after the crime had been committed. In ancient Egypt, shame wasn't just a stain, it was a curse, passed down, sealed in stone, and carved into memory. even your clothes, told the world who you were. In a society where most Egyptians wore clean, white linen, a symbol of purity and respectability, the disgraced were forced into faded, patched garments. Their shame wasn't whispered. It was worn. One tax record even documents a man's property value being reduced, not because of damage or debt, but because his clothes brought disgrace to the neighborhood. Shame had a market price. Architecture changed. To Namarna, 1. Man's doorway was deliberately narrowed, so he'd scrape his shoulders every time he entered, a daily reminder that he no longer fit. In another home, the family meal scenes, once vibrant images of joy, were whitewashed into silence. Blank walls, where love once lived. What's most haunting is that these people weren't born outcasts. Archaeologists have found children's toys in the very homes where adults were later marked for disgrace. These weren't hardened criminals. They were ordinary people who made a mistake and paid for it across generations. So why did the Egyptians go to such extremes? Because it wasn't just about punishment, it was about teaching, making sure every neighbor, every child, every passerby understood the price of stepping out of line. Shame wasn't a side effect, it was the tool. And the Egyptians didn't invent these punishments blindly. They understood, perhaps better than we care to admit, the psychology of humiliation. In a culture built on divine order and cosmic balance, public disgrace didn't just sting. It unraveled everything: your identity, your status, your connection to the gods, your hope for the afterlife. Physical pain fades. Shame lingers. Modern psychologists call it social death, when you're cut off, erased, made invisible. In ancient Egypt, that wasn't a metaphor, it was the punishment. You weren't just beaten, you were unseen. You became someone nobody wanted to sit beside, marry, pray for, or even remember. And that was the true power of shame in ancient Egypt. It didn't just destroy the guilty, it shaped the living. Imagine living in a village where everyone knew your crime and made sure you never forgot it. That was justice in ancient Egypt, not just punishment. Social obliteration. Their punishments weren't random. They were surgical, aimed at the 3 pillars of Egyptian life: belonging, identity, legacy. Steal something, your head is shaved and you become an outsider. Commit blasphemy, your name vanishes from the records, and you're exiled from the afterlife. Caught in adultery, you're paraded through town, smeared with filth while every eye stares, and every mouth laughs. Each sentence attacked what mattered most, not just your body but your soul. And the message was clear: break the rules, and your shame becomes part of daily life. The Egyptians didn't care about rehabilitation. Their justice system had a different goal: turn the guilty into warnings. A scarred face, a branded arm, a humiliating tattoo. These were not punishments, they were billboards. Constant walking reminders that fear shapes obedience. Temple texts even refer to the disgraced as those who teach by example. The crowd wasn't there just to watch. Their stares were part of the sentence. Their laughter, a second set of lashes. Some punishments were designed to hit deep, not the body, but the mind. Forced nudity. The honey punishment. Not just pain, exposure. Being stripped of dignity, while the world watches. That trauma left traces even in medical papyri, symptoms we'd now call PTSD, trembling, insomnia, appetite loss. Not just broken bones, but broken identities. And when judges really wanted the punishment to stick, they chose shame over death. One vizier's trial notes put it bluntly: death hides mistakes, shame displays them. You can't get more direct than that. And maybe you think this is all behind us, that we've evolved. But have we? The Egyptians had crowds and temple courts. We have cameras, hashtags, comment sections. The methods changed, the psychology, still the same. Because whether in Memphis or on modern media, no one wants to be cast out. No one wants to become a spectacle. The real punishment has always been the same: to be remembered for all the wrong reasons. So if you think shame is just an ancient relic, think again. The Egyptians wrote the playbook, and thousands of years later, we're still using it. Shame never left. It just got a digital upgrade. You might think we've left behind temple squares, shaved heads, and public parades. But scroll your feed, watch a trending scandal. It's all still here, just with sharper resolution. Today, when someone messes up, it's not a priest reading your sins in the public square. It's a hashtag, a flood of comments, a viral clip shared across the globe before you've even had time to blink. A disgraced CEO doesn't get marched through the streets. They get scripted apologies, televised shame, and forced resignations under the glare of the public eye. Politicians aren't whipped, but their past tweets are dug up, reshared, over and over, until there's only one move left: step down. Even children aren't spared. One mistake at school becomes a meme, a TikTok. A lesson for strangers who were never there but have plenty to say. We still demand visible shame. We still want the punishment to last long after the act is over. The tools have changed, but the instinct is ancient. Social media is our new public square. The comments section, our crowd, armed not with dung, but with sarcasm, outrage, and cancel culture. callouts, viral takedowns. It's all built on the same principle the Egyptians understood 3,000 years ago. Let all see his failure, so none repeat it. They carved that into court records. We embed it in algorithms. We tell ourselves modern shaming is spontaneous, that we're just reacting. But make no mistake, it's as orchestrated, as ritualistic, as anything that happened in ancient Memphis or Thebes. Back then, a parent's disgrace meant their daughter might never marry. Now, a family scandal can torpedo a college application. Employers don't just check your background, they check your circle. The fear of contaminated reputation hasn't gone anywhere. The only difference, the Egyptians were honest about it. They admitted shame was a tool of control. We like to pretend we're better, that our pylons are organic, that our outrage is pure. But the mechanics, they're the same. Shame works. That's why it never dies. So the next time you see a public fall from grace, a scandal exploding across screens, remember, you're not witnessing a modern moment. You're watching an ancient ritual, replayed in pixels. This has always been about more than punishment. It's about memory, about reputation, about the fear of being forgotten, or worse, remembered for all the wrong reasons. In ancient Egypt, the worst fate wasn't death, it was erasure. To lose your name, your identity, your afterlife. Their punishments were proof that shame outlives pain, that humiliation sticks, that society is shaped not just by what we remember, but by what we force others to remember. And that honey-covered woman, humiliated, bitten, and exposed before a laughing crowd, we still talk about her, 3,000 years later, because in the end, it's not the pain that lasts, it's the story. And that's the real lesson. How a society uses shame reveals everything about what it truly values. So the next time you scroll past a viral scandal, the next time a name is trending for all the wrong reasons, or you feel the pull to join the digital crowd, pause, because cancel culture isn't some modern invention. It's history's oldest weapon, just with wi-fi. In ancient Egypt, shame was carved in stone. Today, it's written in pixels, but the purpose is the same: control, memory, fear. If this story made you see the ancient world and the modern one a little differently, subscribe, share, and ask yourself, who around you would survive a day in ancient Egypt, and would you? Thanks for watching, and always remember, the past is never as far away as we think. It's right behind us, watching and repeating.